I'm Effie and this is What Effie Reads. This month I'm going to try and read 30 books in 30 days. This is a challenge that I first saw done by Steph over at Steph Loves. I'm not sure if she created the challenge or not, but I thought that seems like a lot of fun, so I had to get involved. I'm filming this introduction on the 2nd of April, so I'm actually challenging myself to read 30 books in 29 days. As far as I'm aware, it's very much anything goes, just read 30 books. However, I read a lot of Amazon original stories, which tend to only be 20 to 50 pages long. So I've decided that I'm going to try to attempt to exclude those. But I will include if I read children's books, graphic novels, comics, and obviously longer full-length books like you see behind me. I'm fairly sure that I've managed to read 30 books in the course of a month before. However, I do have quite a meaty TBR for this month. I'd like to read the whole of the Darren Shan saga again, which are middle grade, I believe, but there's 12 books. 1 moment. Yes, there's 12 books in that series. I've also got the 8 books that I challenged myself to read in the books that I'm excited to read. And in addition to that, I try to read 1 Illumicrate book each month, 1 Fairy Loot book, 1 book from the Queer Book Box, and also 1 physical book that's been on my shelves for a long time and I haven't read yet. So that means that my TBR before I even start this challenge is 24 books, I think. So that's quite a lot of books going in, and I'm not confident that I'll manage to read those 24 books all this month anyway. So this could actually prove quite the challenge. Some other things to note. I expect to be returning to work at the end of the month, which means that I may not have as much time to read. So that could make this a bit more challenging. I'm also planning on doing a week-long challenge where I allow dice to control my reading, which means that I could end up not reading very much or having to read a lot of different books during the week. It's all going to be completely random. But on the positive side of things, Readathon is tomorrow, and that is a 24-hour readathon organised by Jade over at JD Ray Reads, which hopefully will give me a good chunk of time where I can read a number of books and get a really good start on this challenge. It is almost 10:30 at night on the 2nd of April, and so far I've not read any books this month. Since Readathon starts in a little over an hour and a half, I've decided I'm going to try and read this, The Inflatable Woman by Rachel Ball. It looks like it might be quite a quick read, so I'm hoping I can read that in the next hour and a half, and Elysa will have read 1 book so far this month. It turns out that The Inflatable Woman was a really quick read. It's 544 pages, however it only took me maybe 50 minutes to finish, and it was a really, really good book to start off this month. It's raw, it's honest, it made me cry, but it also made me laugh. And I'm really glad that I actually read it, and if nothing else, this challenge is giving me the push to read books that I've possibly been putting off. Since there's about 40 minutes until Readathon begins, I'm going to try and read Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds, as I believe that's also a quick read. And if I don't finish it before midnight, that's fine. I can just continue reading it during Readathon. So I've finished my second book of April, and as I said before, it was Long Way Down by Jason Reynolds. I generally enjoyed it, but I didn't get it. Like, it was beautiful all the way through, and then the ending just went over my head, so might need to Google that. It's still Readathon, and I've managed to finish another book. I finished This Golden Flame by Emily Victoria. I loved it so much. It was a book I was going to read anyway this month, but the combination of Readathon and trying to push myself to read 30 books in 30 days means that I had that extra motivation to get through it. And I'm really glad I did. I completed what I think was my fourth book of the month yesterday during Readathon. It was Grief is the Thing with Feathers by Max Porter. I think I may have actually called this Grief is the Thing with the Feathers in my Readathon vlog. I'm hoping not, but probably. I was pretty tired during the end of that one. I found it to be a very strange book. It was touching in part, a little bit chaotic, but I suppose that's accurate for a book that is about grief. I still don't really know what to make of it, but it is a book that has been on my TBR for a while, so I'm glad that I actually got round to reading it. Since I last filmed, which was for Readathon, so I think maybe 24 days ago, I have finished out my list, or at least I think I have. So I started out with the best intention of filming after I finished each book, and then I just kind of didn't. So I will get into the other books, and there may be a few more clips after this one if I finish more books this month. But as of recording, depending on how you decide to count the books, I have reached 30 books in 29 days, I think I said it was going to be. So that's pretty exciting. Before I get into what those books were, I just wanted to kind of talk about a few stray observations that I've had during the course of this month. The most significant is something that I think I've been feeling more and more in my life in general, or rather in my reading life, is that the way that we count books, like we say, oh, I've read this many books, I've read that many books, is so damn arbitrary. The whole thing is that I could read a 500-page book and it counts as one book. I could also read a 40-page graphic novel and it counts as one book. But even as I move towards measuring my progress in books, I also notice that pages are also quite arbitrary. Like, if you think about a graphic novel and the amount of text on a page and how quickly you might find you can make progress through the pages of a graphic novel. And then you think of the likes of Legendborn, where the text is tiny. In fact, so that's what the pages of Legendborn look like. It's just so tiny, the font. And yeah, I'll see if I've got any books for comparison behind me. But as a kind of counterpoint, this book it's The Inflatable Woman, and it's probably got a fairly similar page count to Legendborn. But then you look at what these pages look like, and you digest them, you take your time. But I'm dubious that two pages of this would ever take you as long as 2 pages of that. Now, I don't really have a point negative or positive about it. It was more just a stray observation, and also kind of a note to myself. Sorry, my painting's skew. Sorry. To myself and anyone that needs to hear it, that your value as a reader doesn't come in anything that can be quantified. And regardless, you read one book every few years, you read one book every day, you're still a reader, you're still reading. And that's kind of my little tangent. The other thing that I've noticed through this month is the push to get 30 books read in 30 days has nudged me towards reading things that I wouldn't necessarily gravitate towards, but actually I've enjoyed them a lot. The big thing has been these past couple of days, as I've been trying to get to that 30 number, I have picked up the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina graphic novels. These are the, I want to say 2014 to 2016 graphic novels. And I enjoyed the TV show. I have not watched the most recent season, but what I have seen of the TV show, I really enjoyed. And tonally, the graphic novels are the same tone. But I didn't really grow up with any kind of consciousness of the Archie comics, and the art style of them is not something that ever appealed to me once I was aware of them. So I had no desire to reach for the Sabrina comics. And these Chilling Adventure ones, the art style is very different. And as I say, the tone is completely different as well. But it now makes me want to read some of the original Archie comics and definitely pick up some of the Sabrina the Teenage Witch comics, which is something I never would have done if I wasn't striving for this goal. Now, do I think that this is something I want to do every month? Definitely not, because I think at the same time, I have skewed a lot more towards shorter things that I know I can finish, at the detriment of picking up something longer that I'm really interested in reading. At the end of last month, possibly the start of this month, I can't quite remember, I listed 8 books that I was really excited to read and wanted to read in April. And the number of those books I got to wasn't bad. I can't remember how many I've got left. I know that I definitely didn't manage to read The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue. Now, there's every possibility with a couple of days left. If I finish what I'm currently reading, maybe I'll pick it up. I also didn't managed to read Show Us Who You Are, but knowing how quick A Kind of Spark was to get through, I don't think that was a book that my goal this month deterred me from. I think it was more that the things that I had going on in my life, going back to work, etc., just held me back from picking it up, because I want to be able to read it in a single sitting, if that's what I feel like at the time. I think that brings me on to the last element of this month, in that I stated at the start of this video that I knew I was going to have certain obstacles. However, my expectations of what this month was going to look like did not match what it ended up looking like. I had to stop my dice control my reading about halfway through the week, which is a shame, but I have every intention of doing it again. It just wasn't working knowing that I was returning to work. I also ended up having to return to work 2 weeks earlier than I anticipated. Like, realistically, I was anticipating maybe going back a week after I did, but I also could believe that I would have been going back 2 weeks later. It's just something that took me by surprise and I didn't expect. The upshot of that, though, is that I now have a lot of time to read when I'm commuting. I have at least a 40-minute journey in each direction to work, to and from work. So I do find that if a book is quite a quick, easy read, I can actually get through a lot of pages during my journeys. But anyway, that's my thoughts for now. I may have more thoughts when I wrap up this video. But let's get into what I actually read this month. The first two books that I'm going to talk about, I started in March. I forgot what month it was. I started in March, so whether I actually count them towards the 30 largely depends on, well, if you choose to see it that way, really, because I am expecting to finish at least 2 more books this month. And they are A Dark and Hollow Star, which I won't go into too much because I discussed it in my wrap-up video last month. I think I'll pop a link up there. I will pop a link to my March wrap-up, but I did technically finish it in April. And I also started in March and finished this month Bullet Train, which was billed as 5 killers are on a bullet train from Tokyo and they are competing for a suitcase of money. This was a book that the concept really excited me. And then I read it and I kept waiting for the blurbed story to begin, which it just didn't. And that was basically what disappointed me. I think something's probably gotten lost in translation because it is a translated work. Because I just didn't interpret it as being a competition. And the story was very strange. It had multiple POVs who switched from killer to killer, following them around. And it was kind of like a comedy of errors. Like, people kept dying, but accidentally. It was reasonable. I think it was largely that it wasn't the book I thought it was going to be. but with a different blurb, and I see that the blurb has now been expanded on Amazon, Storygraph, Goodreads, everywhere you look, has now got a much longer, much more detailed blurb. And I think that's it. If you go in with an expectation of what this book actually is, you're probably going to come out of it with a different experience. So those were the two books that started in March, finished in April. I read a book written by a literal child called Little Tommy and His Big Adventures. And all I'm really going to say on that front is it was definitely written by a child. And then we got into my month of reading a lot of graphic novels, it would seem. I came across this one called Crema, or Crema, and it is a kind of spooky sapphic romance. It follows someone who works in a coffee shop, and the coffee shop owner, and there's this kind of ghost who says he wants to be reunited with his long lost love who lived on the coffee plantation. And then it gets it reminded me of Spirited Away, and it was really sweet though as well. It was a great romance, but it was also really quite spooky as well. And it was a quick read. It was a standalone graphic novel of, I think, about 150 pages. So I finished it in probably a single sitting. I genuinely can't remember, but I do remember it being very quick and very easy to read. I then read Girls with Sharp Sticks, and this is a book that I'm pretty sure Chloe Reads Books recommended on her channel, and I was so disappointed by this. I went into it expecting it to be twisty, expecting it to be interesting, and it read to me like if Madam was written for a YA audience, which is not inherently a bad thing, but having not finished Madam very, very long ago and really, really enjoying how gothic, how surprising and whatnot Madam was, Girls with Sharp Sticks just didn't do it for me. Add into the fact that every twist was so obvious, so clearly telegraphed, that I found myself second guessing, going, surely that's not the twist. I then had a day where I got through some of my physical graphic novels. So let me just grab them. The first of them was one of my books that I was really excited to read. So I'm incredibly disappointed that it wasn't as much of a hit as I expected. And it was The Sleeper and the Spindle. The problem I had with it relates to something very spoilery, and I did touch on it in, I think it was my reading vlog. So if you want to know my thoughts, I do get into light spoilers about it, but I will link it up above. I think I did enjoy it, but it was one of those that on reflection, it also bugged me a bit. I then read Snowglass Apples, and it was exceptional. It was everything that I hoped The Sleeper and the Spindle would be, in that it was a real twist on the original fairy tale, and it was really dark as well. And actually it became one of my 5 stars for this year, which I think I'm up to about 5 stars. So considering that, I think I'm at almost 100 books for 2021, and it is one of only 5. That probably says something about how much I enjoyed it. And then I finally read Through the Woods by Emily Carroll. It has beautiful artwork and the stories were quite dark. I think it's one of those that I'll get more from each time I reread, because some of the stuff felt like it flew past me, but I think the more I understand the stories, the darker and more enjoyable I'll find them. This next book was my physical backlist TBR pick for the month, and it was 5 on Brexit Island. I'll be honest, this is a book that I only really picked up because I knew it'd be short and easy to achieve. Another book off my list for April. I enjoyed it. It wasn't great, it wasn't bad. I found the pictures a bit random. I was a little bit disappointed that it focused on a post-Brexit story rather than a pre-Brexit story, but it wasn't terrible. This next book is somewhat of a technicality. So I read Cirque to Freak, which is the first book in this anthology, so you can see that's how far I got through it. But I'm counting it as a book because this is technically 3 books in one. I'm a little bit sad that I didn't manage to read any more of the Darren Shan saga this month, but I will be getting through it slowly but surely. It is a series that I'm enjoying and so far find that it's holding up, which really excites me because that was a concern going in. I then decided to read Bridge of Souls, and I did that in a single day. I've got a dedicated reading vlog to that. Just be aware that I do go into some light spoilers about it. This was the 3rd book in the Cassidy Blake series by, I've not mentioned any of the authors, have I? By Victoria Schwab, and it was spooky and it was atmospheric and it had exactly the problems that I expected it to have going in. Another one of my highly anticipated books was Opposite of Always. I wouldn't say that this book was a disappointment, but I went into it with expectations of it being one type of book and it wasn't. But those were expectations that I'd created in my head. They weren't expectations that I'd gotten from the author or the blurb, so I only have myself to blame. It was a really well done book, and the way that Jack's repeating days don't get repetitive in the writing, if that makes sense, was a masterstroke, really, because that is the difficulty with this kind of story, especially when he is literally repeating the same 4 months on a loop. So it was good. It wasn't a 5-star, but it also did make me cry. I then listened to Afropean by Johnny Pitts. I keep saying I then. I tend to read multiple books at once. So this was the next book that I finished. And it was one that I had to listen to a lot quicker than I would have liked. It was a hold from my library, and unfortunately I just kind of ran out of time. So I had to listen to it on 2 times, 3 times speed. I do generally listen to audiobooks at faster than 1 time speed. This is something that the more audiobooks that I listen to, the more I find that I can speed them up. So I did take a lot away from it, but I also think I didn't get the full enjoyment and appreciation of it. So I have put another hold in for it and hope to reread it quite soon. I also finished listening to Sadie, which I'm going to sound like everyone else here. It is an exceptional audiobook. I do wonder whether it would be as good as a physical book. I know it does exist as a physical book, but I have a hard time imagining it as one because it is so well done with a full cast and it works so well as an audiobook. It follows Sadie, who is a young girl who goes missing following the murder of her younger sister. And you're following Sadie's point of view, but you're also following an investigator for a podcast as he tries to get to the bottom of what happened to Sadie. And it's really cleverly paced so that you never feel like one perspective is getting ahead of the other. You do see more of Sadie's perspective before the investigators, but the way that they come together at the end to produce an ending that is satisfying in that it's not satisfying was just perfection. The next book that I finished was another one of my 5 stars, and it was Rainbow Milk by Paul Mendez. This was my Queer Book Box pick for this month. I don't believe it was the Queer Book Box book for last month, but I do have a backlist, so I chose to pick up this one. And it was so well done. I think probably be aware of potential content warnings going in, because it does follow a gay black man in the early 2000s. So there's the obvious content warning, but also this is a young man who chooses to get into sex work. And there's the issues regarding that. There's also talk of drugs and that kind of thing. It's sharp, it's insightful, and it has so much heart as well. It was an enjoyable read and never lost its hopeful tone, even at the darkest points. So it's a book that I would thoroughly recommend. Just be aware for potential triggers. I then picked up V for Vendetta, which obviously has been turned into a film. It's a film that I really enjoy, and unfortunately I found the graphic novel very disappointing. The art style isn't the easiest to follow, and add into that a lot of the changes that were made in the film feel like they were made for the better. One of the big things is Fry's character is absent in the graphic novels. Well, I can't remember who Fry plays, but possibly his character is in it, but not in the same way you see him as you see when Fry plays him in the movie. In addition to that, Evie is 16 years old in the graphic novel, which adds a really uncomfortable dynamic to it, because a lot of the relationship that you see between Evie and V in the film, you also see in the graphic novel, which just made me a bit uncomfortable. There is also a change at the end that, not a change, sorry. There is a difference with the ending in the graphic novel and the film, at least from my recollection, where I really did appreciate what the graphic novel did with regards to the ending. And without rewatching the film, I couldn't 100% say that I prefer the graphic novel ending. However, it was really good, and it was something that I appreciated seeing. I then picked up a really quick children's book called The Pronoun Book, and it is basically exactly how it sounds. It's exploring gender and pronouns for very early readers. At the end, it also has a section for adults as a way of supporting children in discussions surrounding pronouns, but also provides resources should a adult need a template to explain their children's pronouns to schools and parents or friends, etc. I picked up a book called Camp Neverland, which had a very Z-movie horror feel to it. It was centered around a young girl at a summer camp, and it had a very Carrie feeling that following her start of her menstruation, she found that she had sort of supernatural powers, and there was a very empowering feel to it. It wasn't the most highbrow or deep writing, but there was a good sprinkle of darkness. There was also trans rep in the book. I then finished Nemesis and the Swan, which was a historical fiction set in revolutionary France, and it has I'm not sure if it is a retelling of the Greek mythology, but it does take some inspiration from the stories of Leda and Nemesis. It was good. I generally enjoyed it. However, there was something that I couldn't quite put my finger on that made it not an exceptional read for me. The final books on my list of 30 books that I have at present, and what takes me up to 30, are The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, numbers 1 to 6. As I said earlier, they have quite a dark tone. They follow a half-witch called Sabrina as she chooses between the path of light and the path of night. For those that have seen the Netflix TV show, there is a familiarity, but it also follows very different storylines, and the characterizations are quite different. I am really enjoying it so far. However, I can only see 2 more stories, so I'm not sure if that rounds out the whole arc or if it got discontinued. But I do intend on finishing up what's available to me now. In the last couple of days, I've added a few more books to my list of things that I read. In April, I read the last 2 editions of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. And as far as I can tell, that's all there is. So it kind of finishes mid-arc. I'm hoping more will come out at some point, but there's no real information about that. I also finished Lost in the Neverwoods, which kind of took a wee moment for me to get into, and there was some bits I didn't enjoy until I realised why they were the way they were, and then I really appreciated what Thomas had done. It is very much like a Peter Pan sequel. It's quite emotional and very beautifully written, and I look forward to rereading it in the future. I also finished The Rose Kiss, which is a kind of Beauty and the Beast retelling. Honestly, it wasn't really for me. I found it very fast moving. It felt like there was gaps in the story, and it did bring a new twist to it, but I just didn't love it, honestly. So that is my month, depending on how you choose to count how many books I read. I got through 34. Editing Effie here, I realised that I forgot to mention Virtually Yours, which was a short graphic novel revolving around a fake dating plot. It was really, really fun and I really enjoyed it. Sort of. I finished 34 and I think that's been a pretty good reading month. And I guess we'll see how May goes. I'm not expecting to read 30 in May though. That could be pretty crazy. I am a little bit disappointed that I didn't manage to get to all of the books that I'd hoped to in April though. So on my list, books that I wanted to get to that I didn't, I've got The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue, Show Us Who You Are, Adjustment Day, and then I started and wasn't feeling it with The Revelations and The Unbroken, and I also still have 11 books in the Saga of Darren Shan to read. And I think that's all I have to say for this wrap up. So let me know how you got on in April, and until next time, bye!